Ignite your curiosity with Austin Next. We're watching Austin transform from a thriving ecosystem into a global superstar. With our host, Jason Scharf, we aspire to better comprehend the true nature of innovation. Together, we will uncover what makes a successful ecosystem and navigate the technologies shaping our future. Now let's dive into what's next.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Austin Private Wealth, a registered investment advisor focused on fee-only financial planning and investment management. Their mission is to serve affluent clients with personalized financial advice, fostering a trusted relationship that will endure for generations to come. Austin Private Wealth is not just about managing wealth. They're about inspiring you to embrace a future filled with possibilities and helping you architect enduring legacies. Their core values of integrity, service, caring, excellence, and growth are at the heart of everything they do. Connect with them today at austinprivatewealth.com.
Austin Private Wealth is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Austin Private Wealth and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advice may be rendered by Austin Private Wealth unless a client service agreement is in place. Investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional.
Hi, this is Michael Scharf, and Austin Next is now doing live events. This is a recording of our first LinkedIn Live session where Jason dove into the topic of the Austin biosector. He was joined by Dennis McWilliams, partner at Sante Ventures, and Jawad Ali, president and founder of Austin MedTech Connect, and a surgeon at Seton Healthcare. They discussed how to define the sector, what's our special sauce, and the future of the industry in our region. Hope you enjoy the episode, and now on to the show.
Welcome to Austin Next Live. I'm Jason Scharf, the co-host of Austin Next Podcast. We explore the Austin innovation ecosystem to understand how we are turning it into an innovation powerhouse, what's driving it, and of course, what comes next. Today, we're doing a bit of an experiment and trying our first live stream event. Our thought is we dive deeper into a particular topic than our regular show and also bring the community together for your insights and thoughts as well. My day job and experience has been in the biosector, both as an early stage investor and as an operator of every type of product company you can think of. I see Austin and Texas as a whole as the next great biohub, so I thought it'd be a great first topic for our live event. I'm joined today by Jawad Ali and Dennis McWilliams, both standout figures in our ecosystem. Jawad, Dennis, thanks for agreeing to be part of our little experiment here.
Right. Yeah. Happy to be here, Jason. And thanks for organizing this and inviting this on. First time to use the platform. So super cool.
Yeah. Great to be here, Jason. Thanks so much.
Fantastic, guys. So why don't we kind of start off with a little bit of a bio here? Jawad, you want to start off and tell us kind of who you are and what you've been up to?
For sure. So I'm a surgeon here in Austin. I actually did my residency here as part of DelMed. I was the first graduating class under DelMed, and then did my fellowship MIS Bariatrics, and actually came back to Austin partially because there was so much excitement and growth in the medtech sector here, and I wanted to be part of it. And so now I'm a full-time surgeon here, do medtech consulting, also started Austin MedTech Connect as a way to kind of break the silos and help fulfill our potential as the next digital medtech superpower.
Dennis?
Gosh, I feel like I'm on the exact opposite end of the life cycle here. I've been in. I was actually born here in Austin and been I think a fixture in the Austin ecosystem on the life science side for the past 20 years, and then before that, more broadly in Texas. I started my career in biotech on the startup side. So most of my career has been in starting life science companies. In the mid 2000s, I moved back to Austin and, through an entrepreneur residence program, started a company called Apollo Endosurgery. And Apollo Endo is actually based on the west side of Austin and employs over 250 people around the world now, and is a publicly traded company. And I left Apollo a few years back, and after 25 years of starting companies here, decided I wanted to work on the other side and joined Sante Ventures, and a partner here now, and investing across medtech, health tech, and biotech.
Fantastic. I'm going to start really, really big. I've used the term biosector here because I'm trying to be as all-encompassing. I don't know what the magic term is. Dennis, let's start off with you. How would you define the biosector, and how wide or narrow would you use that term?
Yeah, it's a good, and I see lots of people, it means lots of different things for different people. I mean, personally, my nomenclature taxonomy has typically been, the life science sector, and within life sciences, we break it down into three at Sante, at least. we break it down into three core sectors. One being biotechnology, which is, captures both, kind of advanced biotech techniques as well as probably small pharma and small molecules and what would traditionally fall under that segment. MedTech for us is, what we call hardcore medical devices. So these are devices used in procedures or implanted into patients, but have a mechanical aspect and are regulated by the FDA as devices. And then there's this, I'll refer to it as the other sector, but the other sector dwarfs, to some extent, the medtech side and to some extent the biotech now. And that's, I would say health services, tech-enabled services, health tech, digital health. You have a life science tool sector, you have diagnostics. So some people will break life science tools and diagnostics into their own little cluster, and we'll have 4 clusters across. But that's how I kind of capture it. And but there are lots of different taxonomies, and they're all meaningful.
Joao, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, partially, as Dennis said, there's not a perfect box system that includes each category neatly. And then now I think as we move forward into the whole advanced digital side, there's so much more overlap, I mean, you don't really have hardware only devices as much, almost all of them have some software component, then they all kind of play into some kind of delivery model, cost savings strategy, and so there's so much more overlap. I mean, I'm most familiar with the term medtech, and I kind of broaden that to include some of the digital side of things, and then to exclude some of the small molecule healthcare delivery side of things. So maybe that's one way to think about it. At least when we were building Austin MedTech Connect, we started with that premise, but I know we've kind of broadened that over time because it doesn't make sense to exclude some of those other things. Autonomize is a good example. I mean, is that MedTech? Probably not, but we still include it under our umbrella.
So, and one of the things that I think about, right, and I'd love to please people in the comments give us your thoughts as well, is how do we be all encompassing? You said, Dennis, so your other comment, right, was starting to grow and kind of encompass everything. I almost see it as a broad scale, right? If I think on one end, the tools, right, you have the synthetic biology, automation, software for different types of life science companies, to that middle group of diagnostic, therapeutic, med tech, all the stuff we all kind of historically. And then my other category, but you kind of got services, the care delivery, right? We have InsurTech, we have, and I just blanked on the name, but the new care delivery that's coming out of the ex-dean of the med school, right? You have, what do you put Everly Health in there? How do you think, tech-enabled service for something like Wheel, right? Being able to add marketplaces and remote. So it's getting bigger and bigger, which is great, because I think that we want to have it be as large, and that's part of where I think we're going to shine. But yeah, I always struggle to make sure that we be encompassing in the terminology, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can. I mean, another way to look at it is really kind of turning it around from a patient perspective, and how does it ultimately, how does a company's offerings or a technology connect back to the patient? And it doesn't have to be a direct patient contact. In the case of biotech or medtech, I mean, a lot of the companies you just mentioned can have a pretty important patient impact, but it may be more indirect through different services and things that they provide. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's one of those things when you see it. I mean, we defined it, of course, from an investment thesis perspective in terms of areas where we feel comfortable investing or not. As we get further out from, that direct patient contact from a device or a drug or a service, it gets a little bit trickier for us to feel that we understand the ecosystem well enough. I mean, a lot of the things you're seeing in consumer health are super interesting right now. We've traditionally at Sante not done a ton on the consumer side. We now find ourselves doing a couple of consumer services plays on that. But I think that's the patient side is another way to turn around and look at it as we try to build a lens.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a good couple of comments here. Logistics, just the underpinning of how we, back to that kind of delivery, how do we get from A to B? I know one of the, I used to work at Becton Dickinson, and the ex-head of the medication management delivery or management solutions business I was part of now runs cold chain technologies about, getting vaccines where they need to go, and especially during the COVID pandemic. And then, as you grow out to say, does ag tech count as that? Especially as you think of the synthetic biology stack that gets into, and as we're changing that. And and Patrick, I agree. I've never liked med tech from a perspective of what does that mean, right? I mean, I think it's been more of an evolution, as you said, from medical devices. But does that mean procedural medical devices? I've created a new surgical tool versus hey, we're going all the way over to digital health, and where does that kind of fit?
Yeah, I mean, hold on. I mean, just on that, I mean, I think for me, medtech, I find medtech one of the easier ones, at least maybe historically, just since we've been in it. I mean, medtech to me is the medical device segment of the industry. And, I think that's a fairly clear, at least for people who do medical devices, we consider medtech capturing that particular piece of it. I think as you think about medtech and health tech, those get a little bit, can get fuzzy sometimes. I mean, does biotech truly encompass pharma?
Right.
Just small molecules, biotech or not. I mean, so a lot of that just comes out of historically how some of these industries have evolved over the years.
Dennis, so we see now, like, the FDA looking at software as a medical device. So how are you defining that? You put like the software into that because of, as you think about from the regulation and patient perspective, or is that in a different category?
Yeah, no, I mean that it's a really good point. And I think for us, as we think about software, or I'm sure we'll talk about artificial intelligence here at some particular point. I mean, there's this whole additional layer of software being able to connect. And if you think about the Venn diagram of these segments that we've established, I mean, software is becoming a more important piece and tool of that. So a couple of the companies in our portfolio, I think of a company like Clarity, which is developing basically an AI approach for a kind of a whole new way of understanding and managing risk of breast cancer. I mean, technically, the heart of that company is a software company. We look at it as really as a health service company. At the end of the day, it's providing us service and the benefit to patients that we pull through. But at the end of the day, the core of that technology is software based. And so, I think a lot of us who've been in these segments for, in my case, 20 years. I mean, we're always trying to connect these new technologies back to our historical norms of, like, I'm trying to connect it back to a framework that I have in my brain of what a medical device is, or what what a healthcare services company looks like. But that's being challenged now, and I think we're just we're all kind of struggling to figure out. And it's not really necessarily just from a nomenclature standpoint. I mean, it's really, I think, for investors and for entrepreneurs. We've tended to define for ourselves, business models and ways that we understand the way certain industries work. But how do you build a money generating business with an AI tool? A lot of this is really kind of being defined right now as we go, and we're all trying to kind of figure out what that framework really looks like.
I mean, one thing that we had thought about was not just from the insider's perspective, but when you look across at the broader community and try to engage people that maybe haven't been as engaged. Like, one goal for me personally was to engage the broader clinical community. And I think medtech is a term that most people at least are kind of familiar with. And that's something that, a different perspective to think about versus like some of these other terms like tech bio and things like that. People are kind of like, well, I don't really know what that is unless you're in the industry. And so, I mean, with MedTech Connect, that's why we went that way. And, software as a medical device is a really interesting perspective, because if it's regulated like medical device, does that fall under MedTech? And in some ways, it's kind of a moot point, right? I mean, it's not what you call it, it's what you do with it.
Yeah, tech bio, which is a term obviously I started using a lot, is a whole new term, right? Digital health was new, 10 years ago. And we talk about, Dennis, you mentioned like artificial intelligence. That's probably a good place for us to ask the question of, we're based in Austin, and I'm going to give you my answer real quick and then ask you for yours. What's the special sauce? What kind of makes us, us unique? I'll kind of stay where I think, which is, it really is the convergence technology. It's able to bring AI, software, business model changes to these different types of problems that we face in healthcare. But, Jawad, why don't we kind of start with you? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, historically, as you all know, Austin has not been like a top 5 life science powerhouse. But looking to the future, I felt like, and I'm obviously a newcomer here, I'm looking to learn, and, talking with you all about this kind of stuff is really exciting for me, because I'm always looking to like reframe things and learn new things. But just the combination of, having all the UT knowledge base and talent, all of the, tech companies like Meta, Google, Amazon here, and then combine that with the startup energy, all of the investment resources. And then it gets super exciting when you think about the regional metros, right? Even if you just take San Antonio and all the clinical volume and medtech or tech bio, life science activity there, and you combine that, it seemed like the potential is, much more than some of these historically robust areas in terms of growth over the next 5-10 years, especially as you think about, the growth isn't going to be in pure hardware, right? It's going to be in the advanced technology, like the Neuralink kind of stuff, or the software as medical device kind of stuff. And I felt like that was a real advantage that we had here in terms of having a lot of the building blocks, people, knowledge-based excitement in this city and in this region.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I mean, as I think back, over the last 20 years and what's really been driving the kind of the more recent growth, I point to the people and the entrepreneurs. It's something it's weird. I mean, Austin catches a lot of flack sometimes for its own personal view of itself at times from other cities in the state. And you're right, we don't have from a healthcare research perspective, we don't have the same resources that they have in Houston or no one really has it relative to Houston, but even Dallas and San Antonio to some extent. But Austin has always had and been able to attract really solid entrepreneurs within the healthcare space and medtech, biotech. Each of those segments, there are really talented entrepreneurs here. Some that have relocated and some homegrown. You think about Rick Hawkins and Matt Winkler and some of the people that have just been stalwarts of the space for a long time. And I think that's just kept a pretty steady stream of entrepreneurial talent here. Again, I'll tout out our venture community. I mean, you've got Sante, of course, which has been more than 15 years in the Austin community. And while we don't have a manifesto to invest like locally in Austin, I mean, the fact that we're here certainly allows us the chance to push and drive when we can on that. Revival Healthcare just raised a large fund and is based here in Austin. S3 is doing MedTech now. So I think that combination of entrepreneurial talent and venture capital here, and now of course we have DelMed, which is a huge add to the community, which is not only bringing new resources to Austin, but I think really helping assembling a lot of the life science technology at UT. I mean, UT's always had some very strong technology, within the biotech and medtech and engineering side. But I think DelMed is actually allowing that to centralize in ways that, people haven't really appreciated before. And, there's some real stars over there. And I think that's helping with the local ecosystem as well.
Jess, you've been here for a long time, and you said with Apollo and the like. Do you see the types of companies that are starting to grow up and be unicorns? We talk about Matt Winkler or Asuragen, which is very different than the current unicorns of Wheel and Elligo and Everly Health. So we seeing a change in what is defined as an Austin company?
I don't know that I would say that's necessarily a change. I think now we're just seeing more success more broadly. I mean, I think the companies you just look at Everly. I mean, they've really built this amazing healthcare business and did it here in Austin, which is really great to see. And so I think the fact that we can build companies like that of that size and scope and scale is just a great sign of the health of the ecosystem. Look, it's still hard to build. If you're trying to build, let's just say a cell-based therapy in biotech, right? I mean, it's still hard to do that in Austin. I mean, we don't have the manufacturing capability. We don't have necessarily the lab capability here, for some of those things. But Shattuck Labs is built here successfully on the biotech side. I mean, there are other groups here in certain segments where, if you can just get the talent in and around, that's certainly enabling that. And then, of course, look what we're doing here. I mean, we're on a kind of a shared platform interacting, with the world apparently. And, the ability for people to work remote and, we're all proficient in Zoom and Teams and things like that. That's enabled a new way to think about how you build these companies. So, where before you always had to try to get that executive talent, geolocated, where your labs are, geolocated where you're going to do your early clinical work. You can be much more distributed now. I mean, we have companies. Heck, now, our model now is most of our companies are doing clinical trials and EFS around the world. We have one company based in Minnesota. They're clinical persons in San Francisco. They have a couple of people here in Austin. They ran their clinical trials. Their clinical sites were in Australia and in the Netherlands. I mean. And they did this during COVID. So it's like, the ability to do distributed companies now is much different than it was before. And that plays well to Austin, where you have executives who really want to live in this community. And I think that's what's driving a lot of that as we go along.
Yeah, one question I had with that is, as you build these companies, it would be great to have almost like an algorithmic approach where you have maybe like the executive and tech team here. you have like a clinical trial site in San Antonio, you have maybe some offshore activity, but then you do it in a way that you can replicate and you can move people through, and then you kind of create that muscle memory or experience in the community where people go through the reps and stay here, and then it becomes much easier. You kind of grease the skids for the next companies to go through. And I don't know if we really have that, but I think that's something that is going to happen over the next 5-10 years.
Well, it was we had Steve Case on the podcast, just came out this week, and we did talk about this kind of distributed nature. And it's funny, I've kind of yelled a bit at PitchBook and CB Insights. This is for a non-bio one, but EnergyX raised a $450 million raise. And what's interesting is, okay, the company's in technically headquartered, I think, in Puerto Rico. Their science and technology base is here. When they say the press release, they say here. So we're seeing these kind of multinational aspects of companies, to your point, happening earlier than you would normally see it, just a large corporate entity. Is that the reason I yelled at CB Insights and Pitch was we didn't get credit for the 450 for some reason, right? They actually gave it to Miami, which last I checked, Puerto Rico's not Miami, but it's an interesting thing about what is an Austin company? What is this? We've got Ben Lamb actually coming up on the podcast in a couple of weeks. And one of my questions to him that I think was really interesting, Dennis, to your point, is when they announced Colossal, they're like, we're going to have our CRISPR software team in Austin. We're going to have our team up, our hardware and wet lab team in Dallas. So you have this ability to lean into the capabilities and infrastructure of other places already when you're even early.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just my opinion. I hear you on. Do we get the proper credit or not? I mean, I don't care. I mean, at the end of the day, Austin is on the global map. I mean, everywhere I travel in the world, when people, oh, you're from Austin, it's such a cool city. And we have, Austin as a community has such brand recognition. I agree. It's not the first place you think of when you think of medtech or biotech. I think it's starting to creep up there from health tech. I think just given the long tech history here and a larger group of tech VCs that are in the community. But look, at the end of the day, I mean, we've got good momentum, and there were a lot of relocations of companies and talent, during COVID from the Bay Area in particular. I mean, we saw Guggenheim, several of their team moved here. HealthQuest, which is a very, very large venture capital firm, now has several partners based here in Austin. I mean, for us at Sante, I mean, we added Tom Crummell as a venture partner who was, chief of surgery at Stanford and very involved in biodesign. And, just to have that influx of talent, I mean, they're figuring out to get here. You mentioned Jawad earlier, Paradromics and Matt Engel and what those guys are doing. They ran a search, hey, Bay Area is too expensive to build a company. Where should we go? And they chose Austin. And you're hearing that more and more. So, I don't know that we necessarily have to, be tooting our horn along those lines. I think it's happening organically here. And I think that makes it a bit more durable. I mean, people like to live here. There's a good, good living index here in Austin. There is capital here if you need it. There is talent here, and talent that you don't have. They're pretty happy to know that they can come to Austin for board meetings. I mean, so, I think that we're on the right track.
So I think it's a great part to pivot. If we're on the right track, what are actually the challenges that we face? And what is it that we need more of? What do we need to go? And I think the good place to start, and to put you a little bit on the spot, Dennis, as a venture capitalist, it is likely, we're in tough economic times coming, right? Either now or coming. So it's probably a little bit harder to raise. What are your thoughts coming from a VC perspective on that?
Well, I don't know. I'm accused at times of being a bit of a curmudgeon on it. I've always thought it's hard to raise money. I mean, particularly in medtech and some of the in health tech. I mean, it's always hard. I mean, what we experienced over the past 4 or 5 years is not the norm. I mean, the crazy valuations and money being thrown around. I mean, it all ties back to when the government's printing free money. At the end of the day, that percolates down through the system. And I don't think people really appreciated that until they started seeing monetary policy tighten up. And now as that spigot goes through over several months now, how that's impacting things. And of course, we're going to, that pendulum is going to swing, Jason, as you mentioned, a little bit further over to the downside on that. But, in certain segments, it's different. Like, I would say in medical devices, what we see is good companies are getting funded. The venture capital funds that invest in medtech, They never got kind of too crazy as it related to valuations, and so those companies are still getting funded. And the IPO market has never been a big piece of the investment thesis for venture capital in medtech. There have been some great medtech IPOs, but that's not what we underwrite. So I think there it's a little bit harder, but to me not any different than what it's been the past 20 years. Biotech's very hard right now. I think biotech. I think people are because biotech has relied upon the public markets to kind of keep this engine of funding kind of moving along, and I think everybody's trying to figure out how biotech's gonna go, and I think that's true in Austin. No different, and probably harder in Austin because if you are going to invest in biotech right now, you're probably trying to stick closer to where the capital is in Boston or the Bay Area.
Right.
And then on health tech, it's hard to really pin down right now. I think that valuations, post-money valuations are going to be a problem. There are going to be a lot of companies that have not grown into their post-money valuations, and what are companies going to do with that? What are the boards going to do? What are the VCs going to do? I still think we're in that reckoning phase where people are realizing that. And then, of course, if you're selling in hospital systems, every week you're seeing a headline of the challenges financially for hospital systems. And so I think that's percolating too as well. So, I would say Austin's challenges are, I'd say materially, they're not really, I don't worry about an Austin challenge right now versus just the overall market challenges of any company, no matter where they're based right now. And so, again, I think we've got good fundamentals here, and companies tend to be a little more capital efficient here in Austin. I think just because of just how we've grown and built, and I think that ends up benefiting the ecosystem.
So Jawad, you just started Austin MedTech Connect. I'm going to guess you felt there was a gap and something needed. So where do you see the challenges coming?
Yeah, and just to kind of go back a little bit, so as I was getting more into the consulting side and meeting people in the community, I realized how many people there actually were in town. Like I'd look up a company and then find, one of their executive team in Austin, or, network with someone on LinkedIn. And I was like, oh, like they're in Austin also. And it seemed like we had so much going on, but it wasn't connected. And so I felt like one of the challenges we had here was just a lack of a central community. And not that, we're going to be decentral community, but a group of central communities where there is a place for people to go if they're wanting to build, or even if they're wanting to just be a part of that movement, just to collaborate with other people, learn, kind of, talk with people like Dennis who've built a company here, right? And have kind of the historical perspective of what to do, what not to do. So that was kind of the biggest challenge we were trying to help with. And our goal is basically just to break down the silos, to connect all the different sectors, because in this space there are a lot of sectors, right? It's not just like 2 or 3, it's like 6 or 7. You have the investors, the clinicians, the startups, the tech people, the large tech companies, the large med tech companies. Kind of there's a large group of stakeholders, and I think it works best if they all have a place to go to work together in a coordinated way. And so that was kind of one challenge that we're trying to address.
Yeah, Jawad, you mentioned that earlier in terms of organization of resources and stuff. And I think your comments on connectivity. I remember when I was starting Apollo back in the mid 2000s, it was, to be honest, it was a little bit of the same. And, you need that advice, and you need some of the experience of the people that are in the community to point you in the right direction. It makes no sense to go reinvent the wheel every time you have to do something. And that's one of the things I've liked about Austin as a community, as an entrepreneur. And I think people really recognize that when they move here. It's a collaborative group. People are pretty supportive. I'm just looking at some of the names here that are putting on comments. These are people that I've known in this ecosystem for the past couple of decades, and we've always been able to pick up the phone and call each other, provide a resource, give that direction, and having kind of a single point of contact that Jawad is super helpful. If anything, just a traffic cop and direct people to resources that are there. I know for a while we had just a group of entrepreneurs that would just get together and grab a couple of beers when times were tough, and that got me through some the 08, 09, that's for sure. I don't know if Adam Berman's on here, but Berman and I used to our offices were right down the street from each other, and we'd had this little red phone 911 if one of us needed to go, complain to the other and get some advice. So, those things are really important. And I would contrast that with what you see in the Bay Area, like, with companies there. You do not necessarily have the same collaborative environment. Entrepreneurs tend to be pretty competitive. There's this, I can't help this other company because that somehow may, impact what we're doing. I think all of us in Austin, for the most part, feel that, it's a rising tide helps all boats. And, to the extent we can help each other, we're all busy, but everyone here is willing to raise a hand.
And I think that's not just in the biosector. I mean, something that I've said many times. So I've only been here for, just under 2 years, and met an amazing number of people. And the driving factor of that is if somebody says they're going to introduce me to somebody, 80% of the time they do, which is an insane stat, as your point, like anywhere else in New York or like that, maybe a quarter, if you're half the time it's going to be that. And you meet a lot of people, but then it's how do you get the critical mass, right? One of the things, and I'll say this, especially with the biosector, I'll say this out loud and be recorded on it. When I look around the networking or the industry groups in Austin, we have like 15 for the biosector. And we don't have the critical mass for that. I went to an event recently that was one of the names. There's like 20 people there. And I'm like, I'm sure that's not what they wanted either. And I'm like, I don't see how we have all these little ones,
Yeah, that's always been a bugaboo of mine here in Austin. And again, we not only do we not really have the critical mass in Austin for that, I would almost argue statewide. If we took all the life science companies and infrastructure from Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and some of the other regions, and combined that together, we could almost reach the feet of Boston and San Francisco on that. And so I just think we need to be practical about that. I mean, look, everyone wants to help, and I think that's great. And I think part of your point is that there are so many groups because so many people like connecting and doing that.
Right.
It is a challenge, I would say. I mean, if I think back when I was an entrepreneur, trying to navigate through that in terms of as an entrepreneur, you need very specific type of help in networking at times, and trying to navigate, what's the right group that I need to go to for that? How do I maximize my time on that? That can be challenging, depending on kind of where you are in that ecosystem. But I think, it doesn't take very long if you go to a couple of those events and you kind of find this network of people in Austin that are willing to help and contribute, but can you slap a name on that? Can you organize that? I don't know. I mean, I commend and I like Jawad, what you guys are doing in terms of just trying to build just the connectome on that. And sometimes that requires getting together and having events. Sometimes it means just people are willing to take an email from somebody.
Yeah, and I think when I think about the community aspect, right? It's not. I think it's too quick to say it's this 100-person happy hour event, right? And especially kind of post pandemic, at least for me, that event has really come down in terms of its importance, right? It was always like that was the thing, but now we have different opportunities. You have Slack, you have digital communities like on Slack. Now, I've always kind of run into issues that, and I've said this before, that I'm on like 7 different Slack channels, and 80% of them are all focused on very transactional. I have, I need, I want, I give, which is fine. You need that kind of thing too, but the ability to actually drive that, a conversation of like, how do we think about X? Or I have this problem. The answer is just not simply yes, no, or here's a name, right? Something I wanted to also kind of pivot to on where I see some of the challenges is just straight up life science infrastructure, right? We do not nearly have enough wet lab space. I think ACC Bioincubator is amazing and stuff that Nancy's doing over there. And it can't be every time I talk to somebody like, yeah, we're starting a new thing and it's over there. Like, that can't be the only option, right? And it's interesting. We have the Innovation District downtown, which I just heard on the Austin Breakdown podcast, that it opened in August and they still were not having anybody yet sign up. So there was no anchor tenant. I think it's wonderful if the rumors seem to be true that Alexandria bought the Teachers Texas Retirement Building, because I think having Alexandria here and actually having this be one of their core regions would be great. I'm not convinced that putting wet lab space, the most expensive type of real estate, downtown in the most expensive area is the best move for how we can actually get the infrastructure. Because I think I would assume, Dennis, that any startups that you guys backed that would say like, yeah, we're going to go downtown and for the lab space, like, that's not a great use of funds.
Or even back to your more fundamental point. I mean, you if you're going to be building a cell-based therapy or a company that requires a ton of wet lab and space and experience, like, do you really want to do that in Austin? And we would say that. I mean, we would not, obviously, if we had the critical mass, we would do it. We would make it happen, of course. But it's like, it's not as easy as doing it in San Diego, as doing it in Boston and in the greater Bay Area. But so I don't know. I mean, I think, somebody on one of the questions, it looks like Scott Collins asked this question, other than capital, what could we fix? I mean, I do think solving a bit of the wet lab space, that's always been an issue in terms of how do we get biotech going here? Where's the spot that you can kind of get something kicked off without, kind of really burning all of your seed budget, which is most likely not going to come from venture out of the first go. Right. Those things are solvable. Communities, in Alexandria has done this in areas. You go to Dallas and look what they've done at Pegasus Park and some of the facilities there. There are good models of how you might be able to do that. Is downtown the right place to do that? I'm not sure. MedTech's a little bit easier. I mean, MedTech, you need, prototyping capability, which has gotten so much easier with desktop 3D printing and some of those types of technologies. We always joke that the original Apollo offices on 7,000 Bee Caves were the original MedTech incubator. We took that space over from a company called Calcitech. And then once Apollo moved out of it to a bigger space, Adam and TVA moved in. And then I actually think another MedTech company is now taking over the lease from Becton Dickinson. So that's like 18 years of MedTech companies in one small little office space. So, there's a lot of that kind of in and around Austin. And one thing that does help on that, though, if you think about infrastructure, we have had the relocation of some very large companies to Austin. You think about on the MedTech side, the whole St. Jude and Abbott thing has been pretty impressive. I mean, maybe not from a lab or benchtop research standpoint, but from a talent perspective, I mean, there's a lot of really good talent here in town now from some of those moves. And, I think we can start to think about equivalence on that on the biopharma, biotech side. Those things that always really help kind of build the overall infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think about from when I say that our secret sauce is like the convergence tech, any sort of physical space, and I think in many ways, right, unlike say a Twitter or enterprise software, there is going to be a physical component to life science, right? You usually have a lab, you usually have something you need to run. Is being able to have a space that has computation, that has wet lab, that has physical, 3D printing, being able to build, med device prototypes. I think if we can have something like that, whether as an incubator or as Enrique said, or just as a space, right, that you can do, and then bringing in just kind of that creativity, I think really is going to be something that we can benefit from, right? And not just lean into one or the other, because I think we have just so much. I think as the sector diversity, both across all sectors in Austin, and then even within the biosector, is we have a lot of different things. We're not one thing.
Yeah, and I've heard rumblings of various projects and initiatives around there. I mean, it's hard for us to keep track of what's really going to stick and what's going to go. But you mentioned Alexandria. I mean, that seems to be forming a bit. I mean, I know they're thinking of running some type of health tech meeting here in the next few months, which I think is a good sign. Another good sign is just a lot of the bigger law firms that work with the health tech companies and biotech and medtech companies looking to set up offices here.
Yeah.
And a couple of them are already here. And so, I think those are good signs that people are recognizing. I mean, it seems like Austin's on the top of everybody's next city to expand in list in healthcare. We don't always get over that line in terms of it actually happening, but I think it's something that seems to be percolating, and maybe we get over the hump.
Yeah, and I think from the infrastructure perspective, I was just going to say it might make more sense to have like a distributed, coordinated network of resources that are easy to access for locals, rather than building like a super incubator center, just from a practical perspective, until we can have that critical mass of, we have all these companies coming through, to avoid kind of some of the pitfalls of having a space that's not used to its full
Yeah,
potential.
Jawad, who did that really well back, in my earlier days doing this. BioHouston did a great job of that. And not only did they just catalog that for Houston, they actually, for a while, they were almost the de facto statewide organization on that. Jacqueline Northcutt was a great connector across the state. And Antonavi, who's there now, has a spectacular network as well. And that might be worthwhile. And they've always been super collaborative, but I think looking at some of the things that they did to enable kind of a virtual infrastructure, now they've got some tremendous hardcore assets. So you look at what they're doing at TMCX and is there. I think that playbook, that virtual network is what eventually led to kind of these more bigger facilities that people like. Or we can go find the Austin version of Lyda Hunt and build Pegasus Park, right? I mean, there are a couple of ways you can kind of get to it.
Yeah.
But, I like that concept, Jawad, of kind of, building a network resource virtually at first that allows people to navigate through easier.
Yeah, and I'll reach out to you to get those connections because we're trying to help facilitate that, and so meeting with people who've done that will be awesome.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is yes, let's go build that, have the virtual, have it all kind of come together. But I think what you're talking about BioHouston is a good kind of, I think, segue into kind of the next piece of what I was looking to talk about, which is, you've said many times in SU, like, if I'm building a cell therapy, I don't know, this is the spot. I think of the Texas Triangle having very different capabilities, very different talent, even across the biosector. And that's a good thing, right? The fact that we can actually lean into some of this stuff. I mean, when I think generally about more classic med tech device, therapies, I think Houston, right? When I think of, I keep putting about that convergence tech, I think of that's us. Something that I only learned about in the last couple of months in San Antonio that I wish that they would, yell about more is the clinical trial infrastructure is huge there. I'm like, great, we should be, leaning into all of that and be this, more cooperative. I'm going to make, the Texas BioCorridor, I keep saying that term, I'm going to make it happen, right? But anything that I can think of it, I've gone to Houston for the day and gone to TMC, and your point, it's huge and amazing. Gone down to San Antonio, both capital flowing in both directions, companies flowing in both directions. So, Jawad, how do you see us being able to leverage the fact that we have all of these different capabilities, but connected?
I think, the problem is that we're not organized internally. So it's hard for us to interface with external networks in an effective way, right? It's not, you have to kind of do like these one-off things, and that's not practical to scale, So what we're trying to do is organize the Austin community and kind of have like a structure around it. And then we have a dinner coming up in December 8th for Austin and San Antonio community leaders to help build those relationships. And then I think that's kind of starting the ball rolling in terms of, we have all these different resources, but we're not even organized internally to be able to interface with these other cities like Houston or San Antonio. You have these, informal networks, which are awesome. But I think in some ways, I feel like we have the potential to grow in addition to that with more formal networks. And that'll allow us to leverage these other resources and then build that critical mass to, create our own facilities over time here. But I think it's a step-by-step process. And, we're kind of on step 2 or 3 and, out of like maybe 10.
Yeah, Jawad, it's a great point. The single point of contact problem for Austin's always been an issue. I think it is, again, not to pump up, BioHouston so much, but for years we all knew, like, if you wanted to do something in life sciences in the greater Houston area, you called Ann or Jacqueline at BioHouston. If now you can also go to TMCX, and Tom and his team are going to have kind of the nexus there, things you're going to do, and part of that's physical, and part of that is just the network is kind of centered around there. And we need to find a way to build a similar type of connectome here in Austin. I think if we want to try to connect more broadly to statewide resources. One of the things, I think the other side of the issue too is I think those communities also struggle. As much as they have great things happening, they're having the same conversations of why can't we be like Boston? And so, I find that, everyone's willing to collaborate, as they can, but it's just hard because, we've all got our own problems and such. But, there've been some initiatives in the past that have worked, that have come, like we just finished up the Rice Life Science Conference, Life Science, which has been a tremendous mainstay over the past couple of decades. Sante always tries to have a presence there, and It's been a real good event. And so I think, we've had the Texas Life Science CEO conference as well. Has been a nice way to get folks together. But yeah, I just think, finding ways to build this connection. Patrick Cothion made an interesting comment about, when we're talking about the big companies, finding ways to access that talent within those organizations is interesting as well. I mean, I think a lot of times if you're working for a big company, you don't really know how or why I should be integrated into the innovation side of it. But heck, most of the time when we had startups, we were cherry picking from those big companies. And so, I think finding ways to open up some of that talent network at the bigger companies to the innovation community would be interesting as well.
Totally,
as I've been around, I haven't necessarily, I've kind of said this before and, so it's not any sort of secret, but I've seen Abbott, the signs, I drive by the building, and I've actually never met anybody from Abbott in the ecosystem. And it's like, okay, I know you've got a good number of people here. And so, it's here, and I'm sure they are integrated more than I've seen, but it's that point of, if we have them, if we can get, I know there's a kind of the bumpy road with Merck, if we get the larger companies to come here. I also think, and I'm going to, poke you a little bit, Dennis, on what you said, when everybody said, how do we be more like Boston? And I think the answer for any of us is to not be, right? That's, us Austin is a lot of times being compared to Silicon Valley. I don't want to be the next Silicon Valley. I want to be the first Austin. And I think it's the same way. Obviously, in life science, we tend to look more to Boston as the thing. There's a lot that we can learn from what they've been doing, but I don't want the biosector to be the next Boston. I want it to be the first Austin, right?
Yeah, that's very, very well said. And I think to some extent, communities who try to say like, well, how do we turn ourselves into Boston or San Diego or San Francisco? It's sometimes a fool's errand. Right? It's just, these things are, those ecosystems evolved over 30, 40 years. Sometimes it was luck. I would say very little planning went into making those things happen. They had some
100%.
Really big wins, some huge successes, and those successes then bred more successes. And you don't know where they're going to pop up. Look at Minnesota. Minnesota is the hotbed of medical device development. You would not have drawn a map and picked Minneapolis as that ecosystem center. But you had Eli Lilly, then you had Medtronic, and then that led to that. So we just need our own versions of that here. And I know people lament when a local company gets acquired and sucked into one of the larger companies, and people get frustrated by that. I mean, to me, it's like, let's accept it. Let's embrace that, because then those people are going to go and, percolate out and then, go start their own companies. And eventually we'll have a couple that become the big, 10,000 employee companies that are Austin homegrown. I mean, look at Dell. I mean, we'll have a life science version of Dell Computer, and that will be, you can't force that to happen.
No, I think 2023 and 2024 from an exit component looks possibly interesting for a few of our unicorns. And I think Austin's now getting large enough companies that obviously this depends on the company, but if they are acquired, it won't be a pure suck in, disappear. It'll be, okay, now this is the hub for XYZ company that came here.
I mean, it's interesting looking at the history of some of the other industries here, because I feel like the story has been different than, it was a series of events, and it was more like it was an initial push and strategy, like with, George Krasmetsky and some of the tech industry here and the chip industry here. It was a very kind of strategic push by specific organizations and people to grow that, and that was been successful and led to our success. So, I mean, it's a combination of both, right? I mean, there's people who are wanting it to get there, and then things lining up.
Yeah, no, I think we're in that kind of moment of...
Actually, Duat, I love that George Krasmetsky shout out. George hired me for my first job back.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Real OG here. That's awesome.
Yeah. It is a small
he paid me $10 an hour with a master's from Stanford University.
Wow. There you go. That's what it takes.
That's how badly I wanted to live in Austin.
That's so cool.
Well, this has been great, and I really appreciate Dennis and John, both of you guys, right, and everybody joining us for this. So we always ask the same question on the podcast, so I'll give a slightly different version here. And Dennis, I'll start with you. What's next for the Austin biosector?
Gosh, what's next? I don't know. I think we're all kind of focused on how do we get through the next 12 months and, and surviving kind of the current conditions. But I'm still really excited about having something like Dell Medical School here and some of the things that are happening at the university. I get excited by a lot of interesting homegrown research here. Having CIPRIT in the state supporting a lot of that. I think there's just a lot of potential that's going to continue to unlock. So I'm still excited to see. We do a lot of company formation at Sante. It's something unique about what we do, and so a lot of times we will partner with academic labs and take something and pull it out and build a team around it and stuff. And it's UT. I'll be frank, is at least on the bio side, has not been kind of first stop shopping. We've missed a couple of spectacular successes out of there, but now it's a place where we're looking to build. And having the medical school here and that infrastructure and that kind of aggregation of the life science technology on campus I get excited about that and look forward to see how that combined with some of the new influx of life science ecosystems and the venture funds that are here and the money that's in and around here. That's an interesting combination.
Jawad, what's next?
For me, I think it's a really exciting time in terms of having an organized community around bio and medtech and allowing all the different people here to contribute to that and be a part of that. And then in turn, it facilitates their success. And then we kind of help the whole Texas scene rise. I think that's what I'm looking forward to over the next 5-10 years.
So from my side, I think that it's just getting started. I think Austin and Texas are the next big bio hub in the state, as all of the things are kind of, I think, trending in our favor. And VCs are raising more money, startups are growing, and I think it's a lot of opportunity. So Dennis, Jawad, everyone, thanks for joining. This is our first Austin Next Live. Hopefully it went well and everybody kind of liked like we did. And if you enjoyed it, please give our main podcast a try as we continue to grow there, and we can be found on any platforms. So thanks again, and thanks for joining us.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.